Ofrit, first of all, I want to ask how, as an Israeli, are you feeling about this moment?
Well, I think it has been a painfully joyful day yesterday. It was joyful on the one hand, but also very painful because we have been working a lot with bereaved families and those who have lost their dear ones over the last 2 years on October 7th, and also there are still 24 families who haven't got their loved ones from Gaza. So it's a complicated day. It's not
In
just
fact,
joyful.
you have been working for families in all kinds of situations, Ofrit.
Yeah,
Families who lost their loved ones, whose loved ones were murdered on October 7th, 2 years ago.
yeah,
You've been working with families who have thankfully been reignited with hostages that have already been released earlier.
yeah.
And now you'll be working with families who are seeing their loved ones for the first time in 2 years.
Yeah.
So tell us what you've been doing as a clinician to help these families in all kinds of situations.
Well, I think it's something that has been surprising for most of the families is that following the first few days, the first few weeks, which are very, very happy, um, receiving your loved back is not very easy. It's not easy. I mean, I use this metaphor as if the hostages who were released are like premature babies with an attitude of an adolescent, which is really very difficult because they need a very careful and tender attention and care, but they're also, with time, they get very agitated and their trauma begins to surface, and it's not easy. It's not easy to be a family member of a hostages who came back.
What about the hostages themselves? Obviously, everyone is different,
Yeah.
but how are they able to process this trauma and acclimate to being back with their loved ones?
So I think there are quite significant differences between the three groups who have been released. I mean, there are the ones who came back on November 23, all of whom were either women or mothers, basically mothers and small children. And then we had a group who came back about 8 months ago. These were basically men um, who were tortured and starved. And there's the new group who just was just released yesterday, and they are very different, I think, because not only because they were there for 2 years and their physical situation may be the worst of all who came back before, but also because they will not have to join in the fight or the struggle to bring back other hostages. And the fact that all those who came back before had to almost immediately join in the struggle, it was both a defense mechanism, they had to like pull up immediately, but it also did not allow them to focus on their own bereavement and healing. So I think it's going to be very different for all these three groups. I have to say, like, I'm treating one of the hostages who came back on November 23. And until now, she couldn't really focus on her healing because she was extremely worried for those who are still in Gaza. I hope that now she will be able to do some more work in therapy, but it's not easy. They were taken out of Gaza, but Gaza is still inside, all of them.
What kind of treatment will all these individuals go through in order to help them? And what kind of work will the families need to do to help their loved ones?
So, as of the last group who came back about 8 months ago, and this group as well, they will be treated by the state for quite a long time. They will have physical care, and also their mental health issues will be taken care of basically by social workers and psychologists who work for the state. with time, we see more and more of them reach out to the organization that I'm heading. Some of them want to be treated not within, the state facilities, and most of the families are treated in private practices. They need, I think, a lot of holding and containing, and I'm talking about the parents now or the siblings. First of all, because most of them have held up so fiercely until now and so bravely, and they were unable and reluctant to have time for their own pain and trauma, and all of them are traumatized as well. So I think now, or following the release of the children and spouses, they are at last able to reach out and receive some of the help. Like I said, they need a lot of help to be able to contain the ups and downs, and the traumatic symptoms of their children and spouses. It's it's extremely difficult to be a family of someone who came back from Gaza.
Can you tell me some of the conditions these people were kept in? And again, I imagine it varies from person to person,
Mm.
but during their captivity, is there a theme that runs through how they were treated, where they were kept, or does it depend on the person?
Well, it depends on the person, but all of them, I think, went through very similar traumas. They were almost all of them were held underground, as well as some of them were held also above ground, but all of them were also held underground. They were deprived of food, at least the amount of food that a healthy person should have. And I think what comes out of everyone is the terror that they felt day and night. They knew that they could be murdered any moment. They were told that. I mean, the Hamas kept telling them that if the IDF will get close enough, they would shoot them in the head, and everyone was told that. And of course, the bombing of the IDF was extremely frightening and very difficult to manage.
This last group that has just been released, mostly young men, uh, you mentioned because they were held the longest, it might be the most challenging for them, although I imagine it is harrowing for anyone uh, uh, it, who is in this group. Can you tell us specifically some of the things that these individuals will be dealing with and how you are trying to help them?
Well, I think it's too early to know, even though Israel did have to treat hostages, war prisoners from the Yom Kippur War, who were held for 2 or 3 years and really experienced horrific torture. So I think that we do have the experience. Most of them were tortured, were beaten or were electrocuted. They were connected to electricity, um, and were physically in to some degree. Many of them report sexual abuse or sexual humiliation. I think we always thought that probably the women will be abused, will suffer the worst abuse, but I think what is turning out is that the men have suffered horrific abuse. They will probably have, all the symptoms that we know about from PTSD and from complex PTSD. They needed to use dissociation in order to survive. They will probably have nightmares. They will have difficulties to go to sleep. It's also, it also depends whether they have lost close people, friends, or family members. I mean, of course, some of them have. The ones who were kidnapped from the Nova parties. So a lot of atrocities. It was a horrible sight. And all of them have lost, I know those who grew up in the kibbutzim have lost really tens and sometimes more than 100 very close members of their community. So everything is going to just gradually come up, and it will take time, not just to heal, it will take time for them to realize how horrible it was what they went through. The first days, I think, are probably the best ones, but then it starts to go down.
Ofrit, I know there are other people who have died in captivity and their bodies haven't been returned
Yeah.
to their families. 24, I understand. And I am thinking about those families. And this must be a very difficult time for
Yeah.
them as they see others come home alive and return
Yeah.
to their families.
Yeah.
How are these people being helped?
Well, we are actually treating a lot of them in in therapy and in group therapy. And the last demonstration that we had were Witkoff and Kushner were giving a speech. One of the parents whose son is still, he was a soldier and he was murdered on October 7th and taken to Gaza, and he hasn't returned yet. He was actually crying out. He was sort of screaming to all of us to not forget them and to not stop fighting for the return of his child and of all the other. Then it was 28, and I think they're probably almost terrified that people will not come to the demonstrations anymore. They would feel not only we are very tired of having to demonstrate every Saturday and almost, almost during all this time we had to demonstrate even more than once a week. So the public is tired, and but the families really need us desperately to not let go of those who are still in Gaza. And one of the things that we have noticed is that even when the IDF has pronounced someone to be dead, which is it's not easy to pronounce someone dead when you don't have a body. It takes a lot of checkups, and you have to be very sure. And the families were they got this message, and they even said Shiva, which is like the ceremony, the Jewish ceremony after someone is buried. But then within weeks or several months, they started to doubt again and sort of re-hoped. They was beginning to hope again that maybe their loved ones is not dead, and it's perhaps it's a mistake. So I think unless the bodies will be returned home, those families would have this agony forever of not being sure whether their loved ones are dead or not. And that's a horrible state to be in.
It must be excruciating.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, as you know, Alfred, nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners were also released as part of this deal. Some of them were reportedly mistreated, even tortured during the time they were incarcerated. So I wondered if you could speak to that and the trauma these individuals are also experiencing.
I'm sure it's basically very, very similar, if not the same. It's the same trauma as us people have suffered. There is so much trauma and so much pain and so much agony in this little corner of the world. It's horrible. It's horrible. I, and I think it's a double trauma. I think if someone commits, acts in violence that is not necessary, or even if it is necessary, and commits atrocities, I think his soul will be darkened forever. So it's it's a double trauma. I don't know whether the Nukhbut will experience any trauma for what they did in Israel on October 7th, but I'm sure that our soldiers, if they have done anything wrong, and even participating in a war is it gets you very traumatic. But if they've done anything besides that, it's horrible.
Are there enough professionals like you, Alfred, to help all these
No,
people?
no, 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 no. There aren't enough professionals, and people have to wait a long time or receive help, which is very short short-term therapy. And for some, it's enough, but I think for most, it won't be enough. I think most people, especially if they have experienced October 7th very directly, need someone to be there with them for a long time because a lot of the trauma comes up along the way. Some people are doing worse now than they did on October or November 23 because realizing that your parents or your children are not just having this wonderful journey somewhere, and some of the people sort of try to cheat themselves and say, well, they're just away and we can manage. And as time goes by and as the hostages are released, they realize that no, one of my patients who she has lost her entire family on October 7th, and she remained all alone. She was about 18 and a half when it happened. And when the last hostages were released, she said, well, now I realize that some people do get back from hell and some people will never get back. So there's so many triggers on the way. We just, you know, bring out more and more aspects of the trauma. So I don't think that short-term therapy is enough for most of them. And we have hundreds of thousands of people who have been traumatized on October 7th. And of
Has
course,
the,
in Gaza, I'm sure there aren't any therapists. So,
I was going to ask, has the international community or people from outside Israel, and of course, as you said, now people in Gaza have been so traumatized, have you received any outreach from
yeah,
other people
yeah,
offering to help and volunteering to
yeah.
serve in these really important roles as
Yeah.
these people get adjusted or help them get adjusted?
So we actually had a lot of requests to join First Line Med by therapists from all over the world, but we sadly had to decline it because not only you need to be able to treat in Hebrew, but also you need to really know the culture. I sometimes say jokingly, but I mean it, that for some, in some cases, it's difficult for someone from Tel Aviv to treat someone who grew up in the kibbutz because these are different cultures. So of course, if someone is living, in the United States or in Europe, it's very difficult to treat people of different culture. And also, I think that many of the Israelis, I think, feel that if you were not here on October 7th, it's very difficult to understand what it's been like and what we are going through. So sadly enough, we can't take their offer.
That's so interesting. You described this really difficult mixture of grief and hope, and I'm sure relief for
Yes.
so many of these families. So, in many ways, this must be an extremely confusing time to be an Israeli.
Yes, I think for many Israelis, it's confusing. I think a lot of people just feel relief, and that's it, because it's as if this chapter has ended, and if you're not treating the survivors, and so it seems like just a happy end of something. I think for me it's not very confusing because my goal has been ever since October 7th, or ever since I became a therapist, which is almost 35 years ago, to treat those who are in pain. So if someone comes home and he's okay, of course it's impossible, but if anyone is okay, then that's great, and we can send him on his way. But there's so many people who are still suffering that we have a lot to do, and so that's not very confusing for me. I think
I
it's going
can't
to take a generation to to heal, at least one generation to
Well,
heal.
talk about that. Talk about generational trauma and what this portends for not only people who have experienced this now, but for generations to come, and how this will sort of permeate the psyches of future Israelis?
Yeah. I think it's a complex trauma, in some ways more complex than previous wars. And of course, we had way too many and a lot of traumas. But I think this time the trauma is not just what the Hamas did on October 7th, but the fact that the IDF, which we have always perceived to be like this very strong parent that we can always trust to rescue us, the IDF was not there to rescue the people. And I think that has broken a very essential assumption that we all had. And I think that will be extremely difficult to mend. It will, and in a way, I really hope, the only way to mend such a bridge of trust is if you have additional opportunities, and then you see that the IDF can rescue. And a part of me, of course, hopes that we will not need to breach it because there won't be any other opportunities in which we will need the IDF so badly. But being as old as I am, of course, I think we will have more wars and more terror attacks. It seems like a never ending struggle here. But I think that adds a lot to the trauma of most of the people, at least on one side of the political map, but I'm not sure that just on one side of the political map. I think everyone who lives in Israel knows for a fact that we can trust the IDF to help us, to save us if we are in trouble, to rescue us, to fight on our behalf. And I think that gives us a little piece of, I don't know, of some kind of a psychological quietness or peace of mind living in such a crazy country. But on October 7th, the IDF was not there to rescue people, and people were slaughtered, abused for hours without the IDF soldiers being there to help them. Of course, it's not the soldiers that are to be blamed, but they weren't there. And I think that breaks, I think, probably the deepest assumption that any Israeli has, that that these soldiers will be there to save us, and they weren't. So I think this weighs a lot in the collective trauma of the Israelis.
So the confidence in
Yeah,
the military was
yeah,
severely shaken,
yeah.
and has it not been restored in the 2 years since?
I don't think so. I'm not sure. I think it's very easy to break someone's trust, and it's extremely difficult to rebuild it. And of course, the political situation in Israel doesn't make it any easier. And we are very divided here. And there is a group, of course, that adores and trusts this government. I belong to the other group, and I feel that the way they behaved throughout the last 2 years is doesn't allow me to trust them for to be able, not just to be able to protect me, but to want to protect me. So
It's interesting for people like you, Ofrit. October 7th, in and of itself, was traumatizing, but then the following 2 years added to that trauma.
yeah,
And I'm curious for people like you who disagree with the government and how this war was executed. Was it traumatizing to see 67,000 people in Gaza, including many women and children, killed as a result of this attack on Israel?
yeah, yeah. I think for me and for all those who have been fighting in the streets, it's we are not counting 2 years of fighting in the streets. We are counting 3 years. So actually, October 7th was already the second trauma. The first trauma was the fact that the political situation here can be so horrible. Um, I think a lot of innocent people were killed on both sides, and I have zero expectations from the Hamas. I'm not disappointed. I'm not angry because I don't have any expectation. They are my enemy. I had a lot of expectations from an Israeli government, and they failed me on both sides.
Well,
What
you
happened
have.
here and what happened in Gaza, they failed us in
Do
both
many
places.
Israelis do many Israelis feel the way you do, Ofrit?
Well, I hope the majority feel the same as I do because we desperately need to win the next elections. I think a lot feel like me, probably, you know, give or take. I mean, they may not judge the government as harshly as I do for what happened in Gaza, but a lot do. But a lot of people judge the government very harshly for what they've been doing here. I mean, you know, they have done a lot of wrongs, not just to the Palestinians, but to Israeli society, to the families of the hostages. A lot will be told one day. A lot.
Can you explain what you mean by that, the damage the government has done to those people in Israel itself?
Well, I think one of the days that was most striking for me, I think it was probably a year and a half ago. I think it was on a Friday evening. An announcement came out that two hostages were actually murdered. One was living in one of the kibbutzim and actually lost his wife on October 7th, and some of his children were also kidnapped. And another one came from one of the settlements. And the government members paid their respects on Twitter or on Facebook only to the hostage who originally came from a settlement, and that was the reddest line that they have crossed, as far as I'm concerned. This is the way, when you divide the people to those who are worth mentioning and those who you don't give a damn about, and it's all political. There are a lot of things that I personally will never ever forgive them for. Never.
Seems like you're having to shoulder a lot of anguish and suffering, uh, in not only in your work, but simply as an Israeli
Yeah,
citizen.
yeah.
So I hope that you're able to take care of yourself as well, Ofrit.
I just want to tell you something amusing. I was directing an international course on treating trauma, and we had students from the Hebrew University, and we had students from Yeshiva University in New York. And when they came over, the Americans, they kept talking about self care, and then they asked us, "How do you say that in Hebrew?" And I told them, "We don't have a word for that in Hebrew. Really, we don't have a word for self care. Just we just keep on going."
Well, maybe you need to create a word for self-care,
Yeah,
Ofrit, because clearly it is sorely needed
I know.
in
I
your part of the world,
I know.
for so many people. Ofrit, thank you so much. I know it's very
Thank
late there.
you.
We really
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
your talking to us, and I'd love to stay in touch to see how some of these
So
families
would
are
I.
doing. Is there anything that people watching this can do to help? I know we're many, many miles away, oceans away, but if people wanted to help with some of these families, I
Yeah.
know there are
I'm
many
really
people who would like
embarrassed.
to.
Yeah, I'm really embarrassed to say that, but I think that if people would can contribute, can donate money, so we can fund the treatments that we are giving, I think it would be wonderful. And if anyone feels that he would like to fund, for every for every patient that we are taking, that someone would treat someone in Gaza, that would even be more wonderful. And there's a lot of healing to do, and it costs money. Even though personally, I do all my work volunteering, but the therapists do get paid. So that would really be wonderful.
Well,
And of
that's a
course,
love.
also for the Israeli Arabs, which I worry a lot about.
Well, that's a lovely thought, Ofrit. I wish there were more people in the world like you,
There are.
thinking not only about people in your country, but also in Gaza as well.
Yeah, yeah, people are really people everywhere, and there are good people everywhere.
Thank you so much, Ofrit.
You're very welcome.